Welcome to the Inside Pitch Live. I'm Christopher Lockhart, the creator and administrator of this Facebook group where screenwriters and creatives meet to ask and answer questions and exchange ideas and information on the craft and business of movie making. As always, I am joined by my co-administrator, the ubiquitous Ramesh Santanam.
Hi, everyone.
And as always, Ramesh and I do not moderate this group alone. There is a third party, and so we always like to give a shout out to Steve Enlow for all of his work in the group. And as always, thank you to everyone of our members who are tuning in now, who participate during the week. And we're very excited today because we have a really, this woman has a lot of hardware, Ramesh. She's got,
Yes.
she's got like, she has an Emmy, she's got a Golden Globe, she's got she's on her way to being an EGOT, you know? She's gonna be an EGOT. So let's see if she's got a Golden Globe, Emmy, and
Two Writers Guild and a PGA.
So she's like a goop. She's a goop. She's a goop. I mean, we have a goop here today. I got to tell you, I'm impressed, and it's really great to be able to talk to a woman who's really rose in the ranks of this business that is so male dominated. So she's certainly going to have an interesting story to share. But Ramesh, why don't you make the official introduction?
Okay, thanks. I am thrilled to welcome Kira Snyder to the Inside Pitch. She is executive producer and co-showrunner of Demimon, which is J.J. Abrams' new upcoming show for HBO. She was a writer and producer on Hulu's The Handmaid's Tale, for which she won an Emmy, a Golden Globe, a PGA, and 2 Writers Guild Awards. She also was nominated for the Outstanding Writing for a Drama Series Emmy and the USC Scripter Award for her episode Holly, which was season 2 of The Handmaid's Tale. And she has written Pacific Rim Uprising. She has written pilot scripts for FX, Hulu, Amazon. She has written on The 100 for the CW, Incursion for Stars, Eureka, and Alphas for Sci-Fi, and the CBS vampire cult hit Moonlight. And she has a series of ebooks, a young adult supernatural mystery series called the Parish Mail series that is available on Kindle. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Kira Snyder.
Boy, you are slumming it here. Let me tell you, you are slumming it here. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. Good morning, everyone.
Wow, that is I'm not easily impressed, and I'm definitely impressed. I have to say. So, congratulations on all that hardware and clearly your hard work. So, our members have been submitting questions during the week, and they're joining us now. And Ramesh is going to monitor their questions and comments as they come in. Sometimes they're excellent questions. Sometimes, you know, they don't always hit them out of the ballpark, but
I have those days too.
Okay, great. So we're just going to jump around, you know.
Sure, sounds good.
I think the first, so correct me if I'm wrong, The 100 was the CW, yes?
Mm-hmm.
And Handmaid's Tale it was Hulu?
Yes.
And the new show, is that HBO?
It's HBO, yeah.
All right, so then you have worked for a network, a streamer, and now a cable network.
Mm-hmm.
So
and also basic cable. Sci-Fi and Alphas were on basic cable. So yeah, it's been the whole gamut, actually, yeah.
So is there a difference in the creative process, whether that be the way a show is put together, how the executive staff interacts? Do you get more notes from the CW than you might from Hulu? And what about expectations? So for example, on the CW, you're expected to perform in a very certain time slot, like Tuesday night at 8 o'clock. where with a streamer, perhaps that isn't as important, but there might be other boxes that you have to walk in. So can you just talk about, and it's a very large question, but can you address that?
Yeah, it's been really interesting kind of moving from platform to platform, because you're completely right. There are differences. Some are more pronounced and some are subtler. I will say on the 100, the CW and Warner Brothers was our studio. They were fantastic to work with. They have always been boosters of the show. The show's finishing up its 7th season, so they really believed in it. I was on the first 3 seasons. They were great and very supportive, a lot of support for the show there. So the notes were really, I wouldn't say that they're necessarily minimal, but they were respectful. They were not a lot. You didn't feel overwhelmed. I have been on other shows where it is the kind of terrible notes experience that you sort of hear about. That show was, I believe it was a 9 o'clock show. So we were actually even able to kind of start pushing what could, what could be on the air, because you're totally right. That is, how and when and where you air does make a difference. Eureka was an 8 o'clock show, so you can definitely see that in the content. The stories were much more family friendly. A chief difference between network and broadcast cable, network, broadcast, and basic cable, and the streamers and premium cable is whether there are commercial breaks or not, whether there's act breaks or not. Hulu is interesting because they give the option for both, so you can pay for the higher tier and you don't get commercials, but there's still like a brief cut to black between the acts. So on Handmaid's Tale, when we broke the episodes, we did not break them with act breaks. We just kind of broke them as an episode, and then we would put in the act breaks as we were writing, and it's still kind of worked out. Like usually on a show where you have act breaks, as I'm sure you all know, you really kind of drive to that act break, drive to that cliffhanger point. But on Handmaid's Tale, we kind of put them in afterwards, and the structure really kind of just worked out. And that gets to a general structural point, because even on shows that have no act breaks, like a show for premium cable, like HBO or an hour Netflix show, a well-structured show, you can kind of feel the rhythms anyway. I think a lot of writers who've come up working on shows with act breaks have internalized that structure. So you kind of find those ups and downs, find those like, things are going great, no they're not. Things are going great, no they're not, even if you don't have an explicit act break. And then to your time slot and insert content question, the time that it airs is definitely an issue. Just a consideration in content, like, we can't, we may not be able to do this because of the time that airs or that kind of thing. It's different, of course, on cable, premium cable and streaming. Sometimes that you sort of get pushed in the other direction. We were often thinking on Handmaid's Tale, like, they're never going to let us do this. They're never going to let us do it. And they were always very supportive and kind of letting us kind of go where the story took us, which, as you might imagine, is just in pretty dark places. And on the new show, I can't say much about it, but again, we're kind of trying to embrace the kinds of things that HBO allows, the kind of the epic cinematic kind of feel, which is fun to kind of get to play in that sort of sandbox. So on Handmaid's Tale, MGM was our network, Hulu's our studio. I'm sorry, and Hulu's the studio, and MGM was the network. And again, really great working relationship, just wonderful people, great executives. Great experience and a lot of support for the show. So I've been pretty fortunate in that realm. I mean, good ideas for notes are they're welcome whenever and however they come. But definitely kind of moving from these different platforms. The annoying notes, the notes that are hard to take, the notes that are frustrating because they seem to come more out of executives trying to rationalize their jobs rather than an actual creative consideration. That seems to be less and less as time goes on.
Can you talk a little bit about your evolution? Was writing for film and TV your ultimate goal? Because it seems like you have your fingers in a lot of different writing pies. So can you talk about your evolution as a writer, where you started and how you ended up where you're at?
Sure. Yeah. So this might be relevant for a number of your members. This was by no means my first career. I started writing professionally in 2007, which was not, that wasn't super long ago. I've actually had a couple other careers before that. My deep background is in playwriting. I was a theater major. I worked in theaters, written a bunch of plays. Those are still my samples. People are still interested in sometimes reading plays. And about the time that I was realizing the not too hard to realize fact that it's hard to make a living in the theater, I basically took a left turn into technology, and I went to graduate school for basically interactive telecommunications. So I was in the computer game design industry for 10 years. That was my career. So I worked at Electronic Arts. I worked at Microsoft. I worked at a couple of startups in Silicon Valley. So I had this very, this career that I loved, doing that kind of world building. World building is probably the common theme through all the things that I've done. But I had an office job in technology. And one of those jobs is what moved me down to LA. I was in Silicon Valley. One of my jobs, the company basically moved down to LA. So I moved down with my job. And the games I was doing for a company, was for Yahoo. And the games I was doing for Yahoo were not, they weren't really the games that I like to do. They were kind of more casual games, more social games. They weren't world driven. They weren't narrative driven. They weren't story games. They were, the fun little things you'd like play on your phone, basically. So I wasn't kind of super happy, with my job at that point. But I was in LA, and as people know, like LA has things like this. They have panels and speakers and classes and all kinds of ways to kind of dip your toe in the entertainment industry. And I had been just kind of writing TV specs kind of as practice for a little while, because one of the other writers on one of the games I worked on was and is a television writer. She was on the original Beverly Hills 90210, the original Melrose Place. And that game was it was kind of an episodic narrative game. And we had what I now know is a writer's room, although we didn't call it that. And she was telling me that this kind of mix of collaborative and individual creation that we were doing is very much like working on a TV show. So should I find myself with the opportunity in LA, maybe thinking about making that transition? As a lot of you know, that's easier said than done. But once I was down in LA, I could do things like take classes. So I took a pilot writing class at UCLA Extension, which is a really good program. And I also applied to the fellowships, which I'm sure a number of you do. So I applied to the Warner Brothers Drama Writers Workshop, and I got into that. And that is how I got staffed on my first show, which was Moonlight, the vampire show the one season vampire show from 2007, 2008. And I gave Yahoo 2 weeks notice when I gave my day job 2 weeks notice, and left that job, and then have been pretty much focused on screenwriting ever since. I still dip my toe in other, as Ramesh was kind of reading my bio, I like different media, so I still am interested in interactive, I'm interested in VR, I'm still interested in fiction and other things as well, but been focused mostly on screenwriting. And that background in technology, I got a later start. A lot of, I was not your 23-year-old, I was definitely not your 23-year-old staff writer, much older than that. But apart from that aspect of it, my background, my whole other life, I don't think that ever really held me back. People were interested. They're like, oh, so you nothing wrong with film school, but you did not come right out of film school. Like, you worked in the game industry. Like, what's that like? So I had that knowledge that, I had also worked with teams before, which, if you are coming out of film school, you may not necessarily have the experience of working with lots of different personalities, trying to hit a deadline. And that's something that lots of industries, not necessarily even just the entertainment industry, can really train you for. So those were kind of these, less specific skills to entertainment that I found surprisingly and helpfully useful once I got into that. And also just content-wise, like early on, I was definitely the person who's like, okay, well, you can't infinitely enhance a photo. I was the person who knew about sort of the techie stuff if we had like a techie part of a storyline on some of these early shows. So I just bring that up because people who are looking to make a transition from another industry or are looking to get into writing after having done something else for a while, certainly when I'm looking at people that I might want to work with when I'm staffing or whatnot, definitely open to anyone from any types of backgrounds, but I'm particularly interested in folks that have had a different life than mine, that have done something interesting, lived someplace interesting, had an interesting background or life experience. So I encourage people to think of that as a strength. Like, don't feel like, oh, I spent these X years being a lawyer or a banker or running your own little business. I mean, all those things can absolutely feed into your writing, both in creative ways and also in logistical business ways.
Yeah, obviously we do have a lot of members who are in other careers. One of our members who we actually interviewed was an attorney for a long time, and he just recently wrote the Kissing Booth 2 and the Kissing Booth 3 for Netflix. So
that's great.
So yeah, and yeah, so you brought up a whole lot of stuff, and it makes me want to ask about 80,000 different questions, but I'm going to start with one that I think a lot of our members might be interested in. Can you talk a little bit about that Warner Brothers Writing Fellowship and what it entails? Because clearly it served as an excellent segue for you into the business.
Absolutely, yeah. So there are a number of those programs, and I'm sure your members know about them, or you post about them when the deadlines come up. There are a handful of them. Typically, the best ones, the most reputable ones, the ones that can actually lead to a career, are the ones that are run by the studios and by the networks, and they're designed to bring new voices into the industry. They're often part of diversity and inclusion efforts. Not always, but usually they are. And so the Warner Brothers one, I will say that when I was in it, it was actually in a transition phase. It was run a certain way, and then the class after mine, it was under a different administration and was run a different way, a better way. So it's actually, I think it was very helpful to me. I think it's even better now. So as best I understand, there are some similarities to when I was in it and how it is now. It's a small group. It's usually around 10 to 15 people get accepted from as you apply. You write specs. That's one of the programs where episodic specs are definitely required. I believe that they are now also asking for a pilot sample as a secondary sample. And there are a number of things. They have lots of speakers. They have, because it's Warner Brothers, they have a very deep and broad pool of experts. So Aaron Sorkin came to talk to my class, which was amazing. But they will have speakers come in, executives, showrunners, creators, talking about different parts of the business. And so they meet. I believe they meet once a week in the evening. When I was on it, they met during the day for some reason, which was tricky for a lot of people because most people had other jobs. But it meets in the evening now, and so you have speakers, you have panels. They do basically a mock writers' room, which I think is super smart. So you get to understand what it's like to kind of be in a room where you're creatively pitching, and how and when to back off an idea, how to champion an idea, how to kind of read the room in terms of where the creative flow is going, because that's something that's very hard kind of just get from a class or writing on your own, that writer's room experience. And they also pair participants with mentors, typically an executive, and then you write at least one script in the workshop, and then the goal is at the close of the workshop, the goal is to get you staffed on a Warner Brothers show. And when I was on it, the staffing rate was honestly not great. It was probably, I think, my year 3 of us of the 10 or 11 got staffed. Not bad, but not great. These days, I believe everybody gets staffed, which is fantastic. So all these programs they're very competitive, but there's no reason not to try. I think I applied and didn't get into a bunch of them before I did get in. It's really individual. Someone reads your script, and that can be very individual, as you know. But it's they're great. They're competitive. They're hard to get into. It's not. Getting into them is not a sure thing. Once you're in there, your chances of getting placed on a show are really quite good. I mean, the ABC Disney one's really good. CBS, NBC, these are all really good programs. So I definitely encourage people to apply. You really don't have anything to lose by applying, because someone might read your script and love it, and that could be like it was for me, that kind of that first break. And we can talk a little bit about how it's a career in entertainment. It's like a bunch of different breaks. Like you have the first one, and that's important, but it's kind of a hustle like all along the way. But the programs are great. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, it really is a hustle. It's like even once you've broken through, you're still always working, especially in TV, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because a show can end, and then you've got to try to hustle to find another show. And you know, I have friends who've been writing in TV for 25 years, and they've been on, you know, like 25 shows.
Yeah.
So it's a grind. It's like I think a lot of people from the outside look in, and they sort of see it as just being some sort of all rainbows and lollipops, and you really have to work your ass off.
Yeah, you do, and that volatility is not something I knew much about before I kind of dove in, because my first show coming out of the Warner Brothers program, you know, like I said, I quit my job, and I'm like, I'm going to be a screenwriter, and I was on Moonlight, and that was the year of the writer's strike, so that was a bumpy year anyway. And then we got canceled, and we got canceled so late in the staffing season, because that was back when staffing season was not so year-round as it is now. We got canceled so late that I had missed my opportunity to meet on anything. So I didn't work for 6 months, and that was like, okay, so what do? Do I ask for my job back? Like, was this all it was going to be? Do I stick with it? Do I live carefully on my savings? And then that's what I decided to do. It's like I decided to, you know, stick with it, live very frugally. And I wrote a bunch. I wrote a feature. I wrote another pilot. And then the time came around where some cable shows were staffing, and I was submitted. I had an agent by that point. It was submitted for Eureka, and got staffed on that. And, you know, after that second job, I've heard that the hardest job to get is the first one. Your second hardest job to get is your second one. That was definitely my experience. It was easier after that, but it's still really volatile, because like you said, the shows get canceled. The showrunner may change and clean house and bring in all their own people. And so if doing all fault of your own, you're let go. So being able to kind of roll with that volatility, being resilient like that, because it's hard every time something like that happens. But it's definitely part and parcel of being a writer, especially TV, because it's a lot more nomadic than it used to be, especially with short orders and short seasons.
Can you talk a little bit about representation? When did you get your first rep? Was it prior to your Warner Brothers experience, afterward? How have they played a role in your career?
Yeah, so I got my first rep, my manager, kind of while I was in the Warner Brothers workshop, and that's the thing. I forget who someone told me, again really early on, that you kind of, you need someone to have said yes to you, and yes can look like a lot of things. Yes can look like placing really well in a reputable competition like Austin Film Festival, which I know a lot of you know. A yes can be getting into one of these workshops or fellowship programs. A yes can be, in these days, it could be like a web series that has some traction, or a Twitter feed that is, you know, that is popular. So for someone to have said yes to you, like that immediately makes you more attractive to representation. So I was in the Warner Brothers workshop, so that was like a little check mark that you know means a manager might be interested in me. But it took honestly like a personal connection to kind of make that little leap, and that's why, you know, relationships, friendships, staying in touch with people that are kind of where you are in your career through either writing groups or classes or groups like this is great and so important, because you never know when someone's going to say, oh, hey, you know, my manager's taking on new clients, and do you have something that you might want him to read? Which is what happened to me. I mean, I had a friend who had, you know, she was the one person I knew in Hollywood when I moved down here, and she was a screenwriter. She had representation. She was working. So at one point, once I got to the workshop, she said that. And so what was incumbent on me was to have a piece of material that that person would respond to. And so that's the thing that, back to the volatility point, we have control over so little as writers. You know, there's a lot that we cannot control, especially the business aspect of it. What we can control is our writing, specifically the writing that we're doing for ourselves, our specs, our samples. So I had a sample that like was basically as bulletproof as I could have made it. Like it was a pilot that I'd written in that UCLA extension class. I worked on a lot. I got notes from my classmates because we formed a writers group afterwards. I think I even gave it to some of my workshop colleagues, the Warner Brothers workshop colleagues to give me notes on. So it was a piece of material that I was really proud of, and I worked very hard on. And like I said, made it as bulletproof as possible. And that was a sample that I gave to my friend to pass along to her manager. And he responded to it, and we met and we hit it off. And he's been my manager ever since. Like that was 2008. So he's been my manager ever since then. And then things kind of rolled more smoothly, because then he set up meetings with agencies and I was able to meet with them. Not everyone was interested in staffing or signing me, or unofficially signing me. There was nothing actually physically signed. But my manager was able to set up those meetings, and I did find an agent that I hit it off with, and he's been my agent ever since then. Some writers kind of bounce around, but if you have a team you really like, I've been with my those guys and also my lawyer for pretty much my whole career. So, so having your material ready whenever that break comes is great, because that break could be like a friend saying, like with my friend, hey, my manager's looking for new clients. Do you have anything that he might want to read? But you might know somebody who is on a desk at an agency, or is interested in becoming an agent. And they might ask you, hey, do you have anything that I might read? Because folks like that who are interested in being representatives themselves, they kind of want to, they are hungry. They want to be the rock star. They want to bring their boss or their colleagues someone amazing. So if you have the material that it's ready to be read by somebody at that level, then that's an opportunity. Because or let's say you're an assistant on a show, and at some point, if it's a kind of a healthy culture of that show, one of the writers will say, oh, hey, what are you working on? And that's an amazing opportunity. I've done that with assistants on shows that I've worked on. So you never know how and when that possibility is going to come. The important thing is to be ready with that material when that does come.
How realistic is it for new writers who are writing pilots to actually expect to sell their pilot and see their show on the air? I meet a lot of writers who are writing pilots, and they're really putting their energy into trying to sell those pilots. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, so it's never a bad idea to write pilots. You should always be writing new scripts, new material, building your portfolio. There are of course there are exceptions. Some pilots get bought by people who are emerging writers or newer to the industry. It's definitely not the common thing. I have all the pilots that I've written were basically I was hired to do. Like someone had a book they were interested in having adapted. That's basically it. A book they wanted adapted, a comic book they want adapted. They met with a few writers, and they liked me and my take the best. And then I was hired to, I would work with them on it, and then we would pitch it. And then if it was bought by the network, then I would be paid to write it. And that's what happened with the few that Ramesh read out. That is far and away the most common types of pilot writing that happens, where you are working with a producer, and you pitch it to a studio, and then you get paid, and that's what selling it means. That being said, none of my pilots have ever gone to series, so that's the funnel is really interesting. I mean, you think about like how many, I don't know if you can make a funnel shape, lots and lots of pitches. Of those, a smaller number are bought to be written. A much smaller number of those are made, and a much smaller of those are going to series, and a much smaller of those are going to multiple seasons. So selling an original pilot, it does happen. It's pretty unusual. The thing I'm working on now, Demi-Monde, this is an original pilot from J.J. Abrams. He can get a pilot sold. it's tough for new ideas to break through, but it does happen. I mean, I can think of half a dozen examples off the top of my head that it was a piece of material that was created by an emerging writer. But I think it's much more. I think it's for the kind of writing that your members might be doing, it's helpful to think about the pilot as possibly, yes, to be sold, but chiefly as a sample, not just of your writing, but of the kind of writing you want to do. So the sample that I mentioned before that I wrote in the class and that helped give me my manager, it's still one of my top samples. It's crazy. I mean, it's been a very useful sample, in part because it shows the kind of writing I like to do. It has a lot of deep character work, but it's also like very actiony. It's completely unproducible. Like it's just, there's like, airplanes and RPG attacks and, being chased through the streets of Somalia. Like no one would ever make this show. And that's the fun part about pilot. You can make this crazy, unproducible, expensive pilot because you're not worried about budget at that point. But it really shows that like, hey, this, at that time that showed like, this is the kind of writing I like to do. I like action, I like deep character, I can do these things, here it is on the page. And that is something that has been a great sample. It will not get made, but that's okay. So of the original pilots that I've written, I mean, it would be great if someone wanted to make one of them. I mean, I do have one that's kind of a period piece that I wrote in part because I had been doing a lot of sci-fi stuff, and I wanted to kind of be in contention for prestige shows like The Handmaid's Tale, HBO shows, that kind of thing. So I wrote basically a show that could be on one of those platforms, and that's one that I would love to have made at some point. But it's original ideas can break through. It's pretty rare, partially because frankly, the access that's possible for folks that are earlier in their career is tricky. It's just hard to get in the rooms with people that are they're gonna buy those. It absolutely can happen, but it's definitely not the usual path.
All right, so why don't we switch gears a little? Let's talk about The Handmaid's Tale. Interestingly enough, it's in the news today.
Yep.
I don't want to get too political, but as some of us might know, our president's presumptive nominee for Supreme Court has something in her background that the press is comparing to The Handmaid's Tale. So I want to hear about your evolution in that show, how you got onto it and how you rose in the ranks. But in regards to this other question, Christopher Welsh wanted to know, did you ever feel the weight of being part of such a profound project?
Yes, not at first, but yes. Because when we were first working on season 1 of the show, we were working on it in the spring and the summer of 2016. And that was, of course, before the election, before the primary even. And we were just trying to make a really good show. Those of us on the staff love the novel. We're very passionate about it, really caring about being responsible to the novel that Margaret Atwood wrote, and also some of the precepts that she had when she wrote it. So, and this goes to one of the things you were mentioning before. Margaret Atwood has, and she said this, that there's nothing in The Handmaid's Tale that has not happened or is not happening right now in real life. And that has been one of the compass, the compass points for the show as well, is that we're not looking to invent new horrible things or new horrible points of view. Unfortunately, they're out there. So we look to current events, we look to history when we're thinking about story. And we do a lot of research. We speak to the United Nations, we speak to refugee organizations, we speak to human rights organizations, speak to doctors, we speak to people who have worked in resistance networks in places like Afghanistan. So we really try to be truthful to that. So in the early days, like I said, we were just trying to make a good show, be responsible to the world, tell June's story. Although she was called Offred at the time, it's interesting because even in the script, her name went from being Offred in the dialogue, like the character name, to becoming June, which kind of speaks to her sort of transformation through the show. And honestly, I mean, speaking for myself, I thought the show would be coming out under a very different administration. We sort of thought, oh, here's going to be this like terrible, scary story of like, oh, that could never happen here. Here, it just seems so crazy and unrealistic. And then the election happened, and we were seeing some of the things that we had on the show kind of coming out of people's mouths and being turned into laws, and just even the visuals were really striking. I mean, there's a women's march in season 1 that gets fired on by they're not even really cop. You don't know who they are. And that was an idea. That was the image that even then, that was even before now, when we have actual protests being attacked by law enforcement. That disrupted march was really powerful even then. So when the show came out, it kind of hit in a huge way, kind of in the zeitgeist in a way that we had no idea about, and frankly we didn't want. I mean, we would all be so much happier if the show was completely irrelevant. It just seemed like a ridiculous, dark fairy tale. But unfortunately, it didn't end up mirroring reality. So I promise we do not have a crystal ball. I wish that we did, but it's been kind of eerie season over season, watching, working on the show and then seing images and policies and points of view coming out that are in the show. I mean, we shot part of season 3 in Washington, D.C. So we were able to shoot at the Lincoln Memorial down the mall, which is amazing. And so we had hundreds of handmaids and Gilead soldiers, and our characters were there. And it's an open place to film, so people were like, "Oh, what's going on?" And some people thought it might have been a protest, which is valid, because people, women have been using the robes and bonnets in protests for actually some years, even predating the show, but certainly since the show. But it was our show being filmed, and then subsequent to that. It was, I think, earlier this year, there were, I forget what kind of law enforcement it was, but there were soldiers, armed soldiers in ranks, standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and that really could have been right out of the show. So it's been chilling, and it to your point about the weight, we definitely don't. It's not, despite the actual headlines, it's not a rip from the headlines show. What we really try to do is stay truthful to the world that we are building, Margaret Atwood's world that we are expanding and building on. And then June's story. We're just kind of following June's story where it goes. And it just so happens that it's kind of run across real life in a number of ways. I mean, not to give anything away with the later seasons, but June's kind of had enough. And you see some striking back and some resisting. Which I think is coming out of certainly her as a character. It really is first and foremost her story, but also from the people working on the show. Like we're the time to take a stand, and in our world that means vote, register, canvass, donate, do whatever you can do to help. Taking a stand looks like lots of different things in Gilead than it does here, but I will say in that sense, she is a little bit of an avatar for how we've been feeling.
There was a movie, The Handmaid's Tale, wasn't there, with Natasha Richardson? That was maybe made like 1990 or something, and then and then of course that and your show based on the book. Your involvement in it, how were you hired, and how have you climbed the ranks? How did you climb the ranks? And can you just talk about that a little bit? Sure.
So Bruce Miller, the creator of The Handmaid's Tale and the showrunner, he and I had actually worked together a couple different times. He was one of my bosses on Eureka and Alphas, some of my earlier shows. And yeah, so I was on the staff of those shows, and then they were both canceled. Hopefully that was not our fault, but the shows were canceled, as happens, and we kind of went our separate ways. Those of us on staff, as it happens, it's as I said before, it's very nomadic. You kind of bounce around a lot, but sometimes you kind of bounce back into each other's orbit. So I was actually on the 100, where Bruce and I started working together again, because, you know, completely, you know, randomly, he had been hired and I had been hired. And so when I went in to meet on the show with the showrunners, you know, they're looking at my credits like, oh, you must know Bruce Miller. I'm like, oh yeah, I work with Bruce on, you know, Eureka and Alpha. And they're like, oh, we just hired him. I'm like, oh, that's amazing. So I got to work with him on The 100. And it was kind of during, and again, I did not know that at the time, it was kind of during, you know, the end of his time on The 100 that he went out and basically, you know, pitched on being the person to work on the show. And it had a different iteration earlier. Eileen Chaikin created it originally, and she, you know, just the way the industry works, like things kind of languish for a while and then people become unavailable, and that's what happened with her. So she was off doing other shows and was not available to do it anymore. So they're looking for a new showrunner, and they were hoping to find, you know, a woman, of course, completely reasonably. But Bruce, who had read and loved this book when it first came out, he's been passionate about it ever since then. Just, you know, had a pitch that was kind of undeniable, in part because it really was sticking to the book, like it wasn't going too far afield. So he was working on the pilot kind of while he was finishing up on The 100. And so, you know, at the end of my third season, that was when my deal was up on The 100, and trying to figure out what was going to, you know, whether I wanted to go back or pursue something else. And, you know, Bruce called me up and said, hey, you know, I'm working on this thing. Might you be interested? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. I mean, I had loved the book. I had just reread it very, very recently. Because I had happened to see, my husband and I saw a really good production of 1984 here in LA, an adaptation of it. So I would reread that because and then I had reread The Handmaid's Tale because 1984 was, of course, a touchstone for her as well for that. Yeah, so I went in and I met with MGM, and they read, I mentioned before, the kind of the prestige sample that I wrote. That's the sample they read for me. So that sample actually had the desired effect of kind of, you know, putting me up for contention for those kinds of shows. So MGM met with me, and then I was hired to work on the show. And yeah, so then I've kind of worked my way up the ranks since then. I started as a supervising producer, and I ended season 4. I am ending season 4 as an executive producer.
Ramesh.
Here's a question. When you interview writers, when you talk to new writers looking to hire them, what are you looking for in the writer, and what are you looking for in the scripts they submit? Mm-hmm.
It's a really good question. So I'll answer the script one first. So the first thing we do before we even meet is read the script. So what I'm looking for is, yeah, I mean, you know, how is this person as a writer? You know, it depends a little bit on the needs of the show, kind of what you're reading for. You know, some shows, because I helped staff for The Handmaid's Tale, even though I wasn't the showrunner on that. So I did a lot of reading and did some meeting with writers there. So you're looking for, is this person a good writer? I mean, can they tell a good story? I think you're also looking for, like, you know, what is their original voice like? Or like what, you know, ideally, like in a sample, it's like, this is, you know, the person sends this in saying, I think this is like the best or one of the best examples of my writing. It really should kind of reflect your own kind of, you know, tone as a writer. So if you like dark, gritty, edgy stuff as a writer, that's probably should be reflected in your sample. If you like something that's a little poppier, maybe a little lighter, you kind of love quippy dialogue, the sample is a chance to show that. And I know there's always a lot of concern about, like, oh, you know, but what if the thing that I'm submitting is not a good match for the show? It really, I think good writing is good writing, and you never really know what someone's going to respond to. I mean, on Eureka, which is that was the show that I got staffed on after not working for 6 months, and is the one that introduced me to Bruce Miller, which obviously was an amazing connection and friendship and mentorship to have gotten. You know, Eureka was this very light, sunny sci-fi dramedy, and they read my Dexter spec. They read my Dexter spec because the showrunners loved Dexter, and they just wanted to read another episode of Dexter. So it could not have been more different from the show I was staffed on, but they read it, they liked it, and then they met. And that's where the kind of the other piece comes into play. So it was a Dexter spec. It was kind of dark and messed up in the way the Dexter is dark and messed up. And then the meeting, it was my chance to sort of show kind of how I am as a person. And that's what I'm looking for when I'm meeting with writers. So knowing that they can tell a story, I am definitely attracted when there's like a cool moment or like a something surprising. I've read a lot of sample scripts by this point, and so getting something that feels like, oh, I don't know where this is going, in a good way, not a confusing way, that's always a real gift. I look for kind of conciseness of storytelling in the script. If you're doing an original pilot, I will love you if it's under 60 pages. You'll go to the top of my reading list if it's under 60 pages. You can go over mine, a couple of mine are a little longer than that. But being able to kind of write within the confines of the kind of economic box that is TV is a good skill to be able to demonstrate. So I'm looking for quality, and I try to finish scripts. Some writers don't like to go more than 5 or 10 pages, but you can really tell pretty early within the first 5 or 10 pages if this person kind of is someone that you might want to speak with. So in the meeting, it's kind of following up on that. I always ask about, like, tell me about the pilot, like, how did the idea come about? What made you think about it? And that is helping me to get to understand you as a writer, like what, why are you interested in being a writer, or why are you a writer? Why do you like to write? What kind of things do you like to write? Why is that? So being able to speak articulately about the things that attract you to being a writer is a good thing to be able to do. It's also really kind of a gut check. Putting a staff together is kind of a sort of an alchemical situation. It's kind of a combination of art and craft, and you're balancing your meeting with this person with all the other meetings you're having for all the other positions. Because even in our Zoom room world, you're kind of looking to sort of build a team that has a lot of different strengths. So you don't want like 5 pitching all the time idea machines, because it's going to be cacophony. Like, you won't be able to get anything done. You also don't want 5 super quiet analytical introverts, because again, nothing will get done because no one's going to say anything. What you really want is a mix of skills in the room, a mix of personalities. I've been very fortunate on being on staffs that were very functional. I mean, sometimes, unfortunately, they can be kind of toxic or even political. That culture comes down from the showrunner. So, putting together a team that's going to cohere and not be factiony is important. And also, like, I'm a big believer in, and I get this from the showrunners I've worked with, is having people in a room that are not like me. So that gets to diversity and inclusion for sure. I've been very fortunate in pretty much every staff I've worked on, except for one. The staff was at least half women, which is fantastic. Could have been more diverse in people of color, but all of them had a couple of people of color, which is, again, unfortunately rare, hopefully less rare as time goes on. So when I'm looking to put a room together, I would be looking for voices that are not like mine, life experiences, writing style, things that people are interested in their lives that are different from mine, because six me's is not going to make a show that's going to be that interesting. It'll be a very specific narrow show, and you kind of want something that a lot of different people are going to like. So that meeting is just kind of figuring out who you are as a person. It can be hard if you're an introvert. I'm an introvert, so those meetings are not necessarily easy for me. But you need to kind of get across, and this is true for any meeting, a general or perhaps a meeting with a potential representative, just reflecting who you are. You don't want to be fake, because the person you're meeting with can see that. They're looking to see, like, can I work with this person? For a representative, they're looking, is this person someone I can see building a career with over years? They're not just looking at the one script. They're looking at you and your interest, and your interests in other things, how much writing you want to do, what kind of writing you want to do. And then for an executive, they're looking for, like, is this someone that I can see working on one of my shows? And a showrunner is looking at that, but also seeing like, is this someone that I can be in a room with for, a physical room is different than a Zoom room, but like hours and hours and hours a day, you'll see this person more than your family, most like. Is this person someone that I can spend that much time with? And some people just have personalities that they're really not suited to TV. They're probably better for features or plays or novels because they may not be, team players in the way that you have to be for TV. So the meeting is a really chance for, and it can go both ways. I mean, it more for things like representatives, but you as a writer, like if you don't click with the person you're meeting with, that's a gut instinct to probably respect. So if you're meeting with a potential manager or an agent and like it doesn't feel right and it really is kind of a gut feel, that's something to listen to. It's less of, you have less control over that than if it's like a show. Like if you're having a showrunner meeting, especially if you're a younger writer, newer writer, you may not have the luxury of like, I don't get a good vibe off this person, or they seem like a jerk. I don't want to move forward with this job. But again, still, that gut is worth listening to. I mean, we're seeing now some toxic showrunners are finally kind of being shuffled out. That's been a long time coming. But I think a lot of those writers who have worked with those people, sometimes you don't know in a meeting what it's going to be like, but it is a chance for both sides to feel each other out.
Well, that was a graduate level response. I think if our members didn't get a lot of good stuff out of that, they should just give up. Tune out now. That was awesome. Can you talk about being a woman? And because we have a lot of women in the group and they have some questions. I've got a question from Tiffany Fussell. Mm-hmm. I know she wants, but I'm going to hold off on that for a second. And just, can you talk about, did you sense that being a woman, that you were in a man's world when you first started? Is that changing? Are people like you helping to change it?
I sure hope so. I mean, I think, just to jump to that part real quick, I feel like that change, well, it's helping now because there's more attention on it, frankly. The change has been slow in coming, but it does help. And I'm just not making this up. I mean, the research bears this out. Is when you have more women and people of color in positions of hiring, you get these issues of lack of diversity and lack of inclusion. They get addressed a little more quickly, because this may be more top of mind for folks like us. Which isn't to say that your straight white men can't be considerate in that way, because they really can be. It's just a little, as we're all learning. I mean, I'm certainly learning, like, to kind of step outside your own bias, step outside your own privilege. It takes work. It's hard, and you kind of screw up sometimes. But then the folks that are willing to kind of make that either subconsciously or consciously to kind of step outside themselves, or if they're pushed by other people on kind of on the right hand, you get that. So I mentioned before, like, I've been on staffs, apart from one, where it was a lot of women, which is great. You still see, so I've never had some of the terrible experiences, which unfortunately have happened. It had been kind of subtler things, like kind of getting talked over in a room. And that happens, frankly, to everybody, because that's the way a room works, but it tends to happen a little bit more with women. And when I was a lower level person, I didn't really quite know what to do. So I would kind of back down if I got interrupted, and hopefully find an opportunity to kind of repitch the idea or finish my thought when another opportunity came around. And that's kind of just reading the hierarchy and the flow of the room. Like, is that, you sometimes don't feel as a lower level that you can kind of, stand up when someone interrupts you. So once I got to be more of a mid-level person, I felt more comfortable sort of saying, oh, hang on, let me finish my thought. And I wouldn't be, harsh about it, but I'd be firm, be like, hang on, let me finish my thought. And I would. And then when I got to be like a higher level writer, upper level writer, I would do that for other people. I would say, oh, hang on, I don't think she was finished, or hang on, let him or her finish their thought. So it's incumbent, as you kind of move through the levels, to try to be an advocate for other folks, because it's hard. I mean, when you're on your first job, your second job, you don't want to be the person who is slowing down the room or is being perceived to overstep. So it's incumbent on the middle level people and the upper level people, especially the upper level people, to really kind of look out for and be advocates for the lower level people. And so there are also little small things, like there was one time I was on set for an episode, and the director was a man, and just very patronizing. Like, I don't know if he kind of cast me as like kind of the daughter or whatever, but he was very patronizing, and it was everything from like working on the scenes. This is my episode, this episode I'd written. It was like how scenes were, what the emotional intent was, to like, did I have the right gear for the location because of the weather, and that really chafed. Like I wasn't even sure what to do about that. But I was up there with another writer, another woman. We had co-written the script, and basically she told the showrunner kind of what had happened, and that is a director who did not work on that show again, because it was really foolish on his part, because you don't writers in TV, writers hire everybody, and everyone talks, and if you get a bad reputation on set, you treat the writer badly, you treat the crew badly. This guy was not great to the female members of the crew either. That gets back to the decision makers, and you will not be invited back to the show. So it is changing slowly, but I think now there's more attention on it. A lot of the studios are making. Oh, I just heard a cat. Amazing. I hope she makes an appearance. A lot of studios are seriously, finally taking seriously having people on staff of the studios that have inclusion and diversity and addressing workplace abuses as part of their express mandate, and that's great. So in the meantime, those changes are happening. The fact that I had come, frankly, from another male-dominated industry, the game industry, like I was a little prepared for it. It's still weird though. Like, no one likes being the one of anything. Like I said, there was one show, which was a great show. I mean, well run, very, enlightened, progressive showrunner, but I was the only woman on staff. It was not a very big staff, but it had a female lead, and when you're the only one, the only person of color, the only woman, you kind of feel, or the only LGBT, you kind of feel like I have to be the voice for them all, and that's not a fair burden to put on anybody. So, you having a staff where you can have a plurality of voices from all over the place is ideal. Sometimes the staffs are not big enough to allow that, and in that case, the shows probably should make the effort to bring in consultants, bring in someone who can speak to experiences that are on the page, even if they're not represented on the staff. So yeah, so it's apart from those kind of more subtle or microaggression kind of things I mentioned, my personal experience has been a little bit more of those. But in a weird way, sometimes, and again, it did come off as a little sexist, but it was kind of maybe not in a good way. The fact that I was a woman who wrote sci-fi and action, certainly early on, it seems, it was not even rare then. It just was expressed as rare to me. Like, oh, you're a woman who writes, muscular action and sci-fi. And I kind of wanted to say, like, there's actually a lot of us who really like that stuff and read it. And that is, that has absolutely been borne out in the staffing sense. Like, I can name, without even pausing, like I could name a dozen women screenwriters who write that stuff really well and really excel at it. So there's growing recognition that there's no genre that our women are specifically tailored for, because goodness knows men have been writing all kinds of genre and all kinds of characters, including women, for years. So it's a slow ship, big ship to be turning, but it is turning.
Annie Morgan says, quote, "I love that she advocates like that." So, kudos to you.
Thank you. I try. It takes work, and this is why sometimes you end up with TV staffs that look all like the showrunner, because if they're just not taking the time to think about it. And in some cases, I get it, because like making TV is hard and expensive and stressful, and again, research bears this out. Like we will surround without taking the time to be mindful about it. We will surround ourselves with people that we find comforting, and often that means people like us. So if you are kind of stepping outside that boundary, that means you're taking the time and doing the work. But I do understand it's not something you want to have happen, but that kind of shortcut of surrounding yourself with people like you is something that does happen. I just think it's incumbent on all of us to try to be advocates. And yeah, I try. there's always more to be done.
So on this topic, I'm going to read a question from Tiffany Fussell. It's a little specific.
Okay.
So, and the print is very small and my eyes are very old. So she writes, I'm applying for things as a woman over 40, which qualifies me as an applicant in the diversity sphere for quite a few of these things recently. I believe she's referring to various writing programs. Mm-hmm. But I'm running up against how to answer some questions regarding said diversity. A question on an application whose deadline is today actually asks for, quote, a one-page statement highlighting your diverse background and why would you and why you would be a valuable and hardworking member of this particular program, unquote. They don't give any examples as far as she can see. So what kinds of things should she include for that answer? What would you personally be looking for in a writer who is a white female single mother to be bringing from a diversity standpoint? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I would lean into that life experience. I mean, whatever I'm assuming, perhaps I'm assuming this is you have another job. I would dig into that life experience. I would dig into being a single mom. I mean, that's amazing. There are single moms that are in the industry that have been very successful. So lean into what makes you different from the 23-year-old who just came out of film school. So I mean, if that were me, I would lean into my life experience, whatever my other career was, specifically talking about how that is relevant to the writing you want to do. I think the fact that you're a mom is amazing, and that's an experience that is I think is also worth leaning into. I do a lot of mentoring with veterans through the Writers Guild Foundation, and that's a whole other career that, like, it's not to say that they can only write military themed pieces, but that's a really interesting background. So if I was going to do that for myself, I would talk about I have worked in technology. I've led teams. I know what it's like to create on a deadline. I've worked on these types of creative projects. So lean into what makes you and your voice and your writing unique to you. And then if you're over 40, like, lean into that. Like, that's ageism is kind of the one of the last frontiers still to happen in Hollywood. So I would lean into that. And the other thing also is to look at your sample, because I think, I mean, again, this is completely unfair, but I think there are some folks that look at candidates who are a little bit older and they're like, oh, again, forgive me, this is not my point of view, but like, oh, do they know what the young people like? Are they tapped into, like, what's going on now? So your writing should reflect that to kind of allay those concerns. There's a writer I work with on the 100 who had this amazing long career. He's probably in his mid to late 50s now. Long career, and then his career kind of cooled off, which happens to a lot of us. It cooled off. He had worked in lots of our dramas, and he by that point he was well over 40. And so what he did was he kind of wrote himself back into relevance again. He wrote like this really kind of edgy teen show, and he suddenly got staffed on those kinds of shows, and it kind of reinvigorated his career, because he's a good writer. I mean, writers can write all kinds of things, but what he was showing was, I can write the kind of thing that you might not think I can write if you looked at my resume or looked at me. So that's something you might think about as well, as like, if you're concerned that your age is an issue, make sure your sample shows that, guess what, my age is not an issue. I can write as relevant and topical and now or as young as you like. Good luck.
Yeah, I always say there's no such thing as old writers, only old writing. Ramesh.
Let's see. Can you talk a little bit about writing for Pacific Rim? Was that a big change? You were writing TV, and then now you went and wrote this huge, part of this big, huge blockbuster film. Yeah,
it was a great experience, and for me, one of the big takeaways of that was you never know when and where a job will come from. So I've done a little bit in features, like I've pitched and not gotten hired a bunch of times. but that was the first feature I worked on, and how I got that job was actually someone I worked with on a TV job. So I worked on a show called Incursion, which was a show created by Stephen DeKnight, who created Spartacus. This was for Starz. It was going to be his big, cool sci-fi follow-up to Spartacus, and so I was on staff of that show. It was a great experience. And so, you know, we went separate ways. We sort of just stayed in touch. And so he called me, and he's also, you know, he's also a feature person. He's also interested in directing. So he was, you know, kind of looking to get his first directing gig. So I got a call kind of out of the blue from him saying, hey, you know, what's your availability? I'm putting together a writer's room for this feature that I'm directing. And I'm like, that sounds amazing. You know, I was on hiatus. The timing was perfect. I'm like, what's the project? And he's like, it's a sequel to Pacific Rim. And I basically lost my mind. It was like, well, yes, and yes, please. And so what he had done, and I don't know, you talked in the past about these writing rooms for features before. Very often they come in late in the process to try to fix something super late, which feels like frankly a little late to try to fix a movie. So what he was doing was a little bit more like a TV model. He absolutely comes out of TV. So what he was looking to do was put together a writer's room for a couple of weeks, and basically help him break the movie before it was written, rather than try to fix something after it was written, which is smart. It's like trying to like shore up a house when the foundation's already been set later. Earlier, I think is a time where a writing room makes more sense. So I was part of a writing room. I guess there are about 6 or 7 of us. There's about half and half TV writers and feature writers. And so basically it was like a writing room. Like we were sort of broke the movie like you would break an episode of TV. We had, you know, a conference room, and we met every day, and we like had stuff on the wall. And so we worked for a couple of weeks. We didn't get the whole thing broken, but we got it, you know, pretty much nailed down. And then out of that group, myself and another writer, Emily Carmichael, Stephen hired us to work with him to write the script. So, which is fantastic. I didn't know that was going to be part of the deal. So, so the 3 of us finished breaking the movie, and then wrote the script. And it was a really tight schedule, which is part of the reason why he wanted some TV people, because that is something TV teaches you to do. It teaches you to write extremely quickly if you have to. It's nice to have more time, but sometimes you have to write very, very fast. So learning how to do that is a great skill. Writing well and writing quickly. So so we wrote the script together. We took different chunks. You know, I guess like Emily took the first part, and I took the last part, and Stephen had the middle. And then he also was kind of rewriting kind of as we went. I mean, because again, we're trying to hit a production date for, I forget what the situation was. Like it was an actor or something like that. So we finished a draft, and this is when Charlie Hunnam was still going to be in the movie. So it was, you know, he was the character. And we got it turned in, and then Charlie Hunnam was not available. He decided to do a different movie, which absolutely his right. But then Legendary the studio had a bit of a scramble. Like, well, what do we do? we don't have our lead. And so then Emily, Stephen, and I got together again. And we did this super intense rewrite for completely new characters. It was going to be, at that point, it was going to be like a brother and sister team, completely new characters, completely new story. It was going to be a brother-sister team. And so then we had that version. And then they attached John Boyega, which is an amazing get. I mean, he's such a talented actor and like an amazing person. You know, very active, cares a lot about the world. And so that necessitated another rewrite. And by that point, I was on *Hand Maid S TALE, and I was not available to help with that anymore. So they brought on another writer, T.S. Nolan, who had done the Maze Runner movies. And he and Stephen worked together. And basically, it had some elements of the original Charlie Hunnam story, some of the elements of the brother and sister story, and then really leaning into the fact that this character was Stecker Pentecost's son. That became a real piece of it, and so that was the final version of the movie. And so I technically I've written for John Boyega, but I've never met him. I actually saw him in passing at the so it's a big movie. It had a big movie premiere. I'd never been to one of those. That was really exciting. They had a big like party afterwards, which again I'd never really been to, and he had like John Boyega and his people had like a whole area, and I was far too intimidated to go talk to him. So I just hung out with the other writers and with Steven, the director, which was really fun. So so that, yeah, it was a huge movie. It was a great experience. It was very intense. It was a lot of fun. It was one of those things where, like I said, you don't know where the job is going to come from. So he called me up, and that's how that happened. Yeah, I mean, you know, the idea of having written for a movie that has toys created after it, I mean, that's I've never wanted things so much in my life. So that was really fun to get, and that was also helpful because, like I said before, you know, the industry wants someone to have said yes to you. You know, once I've helped write a movie, then suddenly, oh, okay, so you can write features, and you know, I could theoretically have written features before, but the fact that I had done it kind of moved me into a slightly different bucket. So so that's something I'm interested in doing more of now as I'm able to. I'm actually putting together a feature pitch to take out hopefully in the next couple of weeks. So that's been nice, kind of fun digging into that. But yeah, movies are weird.
Do you think writers should have in their arsenal both a spec TV show or a pilot and a feature?
I think it really benefits a writer to have a bunch of different types of samples, for sure. Especially, so it's less an issue. So time was, it was like, oh, I'm a TV writer or I'm a feature writer. That is very much back and forth these days. People work in both industries. Unfortunately, the feature business, I wouldn't say it's collapsed. I mean, it's really being hit hard, especially now. People just are not making as many movies. I know a lot of feature writers who also work in TV or have moved into TV because, frankly, it's, you know, you can make a living at it. You can earn money, and that is less and less the case with features. So I would say, like, if you're never interested in writing movies, then it's probably not a good use of your time. It's really good to have samples. I mean, it's a way to sort of show, especially to representatives, actually, that like, hey, you know, if you're in business with me, I can be put up for lots of jobs. So, you know, if you have a really solid pilot or a couple good TV samples, and you don't have a feature sample, I would definitely say, you know, write a feature, because it will not hurt you to have had that in your portfolio. But other things too, like so short stories are great. Plays are great, because you never, like I said before with the Dexter Eureka example, you never really know what someone's going to want to read. And it really just depends on the show and the showrunner. So I think having a feature is good. I think having, like, you know, if you're chiefly interested in TV, having minimum 2 really good bulletproof samples is great, and then expand from there. Like write a feature, write a play, write a short story. The other thing, and I know there's a lot of kind of back and forth on, like, oh, you know, spec episodes versus original pilots. You know, these days the trend is very much more for original pilots to be a sample. I would also encourage, even if it's just for a fellowship application, or even just it's for yourself, I really recommend aspiring writers to try to write a spec episode of a show that you really like, because it's really good experience, because that is the job. Like, when you get hired, you will, you know, unless you are, you know, creating your own show and you're the showrunner, you are going to be writing in someone else's voice. You will be writing in the voice of the show, of the showrunner. And so knowing how to do that is really essential. So, you know, we're in a time now where there's so many scripted shows that you can't count on someone you're submitting to having read the show. So I wouldn't say, you know, here's my sample of the Nick, because who knows if they've seen the Nick. But if someone asks, like, oh, hey, I read your original pilot, it was great, you know, do you happen to have an episodic spec? If someone said to me, yeah, I have a spec the Nick, I'd be like, oh, I'd love that, because I did watch the Nick. I love the Nick. So you never really know. You don't want to be obviously wasting your time as a writer, because especially if you have a family or another job, like I did. I mean, I was writing, as I'm sure a lot of your members are, I was writing in the morning and at night and on the weekends, and your time is finite, for sure. So you need to be choosy about what you write. But if you have a bunch of samples you're already happy with, and you have not tried writing a spec episode, I really recommend it, because that, as I said before, like that is the job. You will be trying to, you will not, I mean, your original voice will be there for sure, but it's much more about mimicking the voice of the show, the structure of the show. So you might look at an episode, you might look at a show that you really like and kind of really break it down. You might watch an episode like on pause and count the number of scenes per act or per episode if it's a premium cable or a streamer. You know, count the number of storylines, how many scenes per storyline, how many characters per scene. All of that kind of analysis is really useful in understanding how that show is created, and in general how shows are created. So I think having, like, I'm thinking about my own portfolio. I have a lot of original samples by now, and that's the one good thing about like writing a pilot that no one like doesn't go to series. It ends up being a sample. So I have the pilots that I've written for Amazon and FX. Like the shows are never going to get made, but they're really good samples for me. So that's good. Yeah, I have some plays from when I was a playwright. I have a couple original feature specs. I actually need to write another feature spec. It's time for me to have a new one of those. And I have a couple short stories. Like the meeting I had for my first show, Moonlight. I had a short story about an unconventional vampire, and that's what they read to meet with me on. So you just never really know.
Can you address the in regards to a new writer branding themselves? So should you stick to a particular genre when you're trying to sell yourself, or should you have a portfolio that has a thriller and has a period piece or has a sci-fi?
It's a really good question, and so there's answers kind of on two tracks. One is on the sort of the representatives, like basically someone who's trying to sell you. It's much easier for them to put you forward for a given project or a potential assignment for a feature if they can kind of tell a concise story about the kind of writer you are. So if you have like a thriller and a sitcom and a character drama, it's a little harder for a representative to kind of craft a narrative about who you are, and so that's something to think about. So the other piece is kind of you as a writer. Like, what do you like to do? Like, what kind of writing do you want to do? And if you want to write everything, that's great. But certainly early on, like, you know, you might pick the lane you like the best, and know that you will always be able to kind of come back and you know, either come back to that or branch out. I certainly found earlier in my career, it was much easier for my reps to sort of tell the story of like, hey, this is Kira. She was a computer game designer for 10 years. She's really interested in and really good at writing, you know, action and sci-fi and, you know, complex female leads. That was a thing they could say about me that was true, because I really love those things. They were not saying something that was not true about how I thought of myself as a writer, the kind of project I wanted to work on, but it helped that it was a kind of a contained kind of story about who I was, the kind of writing I'd like to do. That is very helpful early on, just so you can kind of get out there. And then as you move forward, then you have the opportunity to kind of try different boxes. So like I said, I had been on sci-fi shows that I have really liked, but you know, streamers and premium cable were really kind of blowing up, and I wanted to be considered for those kinds of shows. So I wrote this you know, this prestige piece, like it's a Renaissance period piece. It's sort of like it's like Shakespeare's origin story. Like he was a spy in Renaissance Italy. So it's a deep character piece set in this other place. Still has a little bit of action and incident, because I can't help myself. Like I love stuff. I love, you know, those kinds of story elements. But it was something you would see on in content. It was something you might see on a streamer or on HBO. And that was my sort of saying, I've done these things. Here's my resume. You've seen that I've, you know, written these, you know, TV shows and this big robot movie, but I'm also a writer who can and loves things like this. So I kind of wrote myself into that lane. And that's great. And I know a lot of people have done that, especially early on. If you know, I have been extremely fortunate in getting to work on shows that, I was either a fan of because they were already on the air, like Eureka, or it's the kind of thing that I really, really liked. I've never had to work on a show that was not a good fit for my own taste, the kind of things I liked. I was very, very lucky. This is not true for everybody. Sometimes you have to work on a show because you have an offer. And maybe you don't love legal shows, but you have an offer from a legal show. I mean, especially as a younger writer, like, you're not going to turn that down, and that's totally, totally fine. So every show like that, I mean, the learning you get is not just that particular show, the writing, the content, but it's how to write, how to break a story, how to think about character, and also the friendships you make. You know, you make a good relationship with other writers. They'll think about you down the road when they might be working on something that needs somebody that's more, and then the show's more in your wheelhouse, or their show gets created. So I think it's helpful to know what you want to do as a writer and think about your samples in that area. You don't want 3 of the same thing though. So, if you're interested in like thrillers, say, maybe you do like a grounded, realistic, contemporary thriller, and then the other one, maybe it's a period piece. Maybe there's a genre element to it. So even within a sort of a cohesive story about who you are as a writer, you can have a little flexibility. So, branding is a way to talk about it. But I think it's more about like the kind of stories you want to tell, the kind of things you think you're good at, and being able to tell that story about yourself. Because someone will sort of say, "Oh, what kind of writing you want to do?" And ideally you won't say, "Oh, everything," or "Oh, I don't know." Being able to sort of say, hey, I'm really drawn to whatever. I'm really drawn to dark, edgy stories. I'm really drawn to family dramas, but unconventional families, or whatever. It's helpful to be able to talk about kind of what you write and why you write it.
So Ramesh, do you have maybe one last really good question?
No
That
pressure.
looks like a no.
Okay. Well, this is a little technical. You mentioned how you like to write action. Are there any tricks of the trade you can tell our members about how to make the action, like, for the lack of a better phrase, pop on the page, so that you engage the reader when you're writing these action sequences?
There is. It's something that I've really focused on, and I think I was not great at it at the beginning. It helps to read really good action scripts. James Cameron's scripts are great to read for examples. Shane Black is great to read for examples. But yeah, I think it is one of the types of writing where there's some macro things, but also some kind of tricks, techniques. The macro thing I always think about is action really always needs to come out of character and come out of story. It's not like a story action sequence. It needs to kind of flow. You need to be telling something about the person that's in the action sequence as you're writing it. So like in The Queen's Men, which is my Renaissance Shakespeare piece, he's like super young. He's 21. He's never been a spy before. He's like, he's kind of like very much a fish out of water. He's in Venice, and he's chased by some bad guys, and he doesn't know where he's going, so he gets lost, and so he's lost in this town. He has to kind of basically he like hides in this opium den, and is really leaning into him being inexperienced and in an unfamiliar place. So it has action sequences, and he falls into a canal, and it's this whole messy thing because that's who this character is. He's not great at this stuff. So really making sure it comes out of character. It's not just like a thing that kind of stuck in the middle of your story is kind of a big macro thing to think about. When you're actually just writing it, really think about the read. Like this is true of any type of writing you're doing, but especially with action, it can be really hard to read action. So I really focus on what it looks like on the page and thinking about like, how is this to read? So things I do are, I keep the action lines really, really short. I try to focus on like, one sort of action beat per camera shot. So you're not saying angle on necessarily, but you're breaking things up into paragraphs as if you were kind of watching it play out on a screen. So, having things like, using sentence fragments, having a word on a line by itself, using things like capitalization, or punctuation, or even bolding or underline sometimes, very carefully, very strategically, really helps the read. Sometimes if I'm able to, if this is kind of a comic book trick, if there's a way to like have the page turn, have a big boom at the top, or you end with like a cliffhanger at the bottom of the page, I will try to make that happen, because again, you think about someone reading, if you read it and then there's a holy shit moment, sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to swear or not, but if there's a holy shit moment at the end of the page, then you know they're going to turn the page. So like embrace the fact that someone's going to read this, and you know, tell the story, like, you know, really build suspense. And you can, I do things like I ask questions like, you know, what was that she heard behind her? You know, space, a step, space. No, it's just the cat. Space, another step. It's not the cat. Holy shit! Like you can kind of build the narrative there. So really kind of draw the reader through it really helps. And getting someone else to read it, like, because sometimes like a badly written action sequence can be kind of dull to read. And so if you have someone in your writing group or in this group, like someone whose feedback you trust, you have read that and they're like, yeah, I kind of glazed over midway through the car chase, then maybe you need to pare back or kind of, you know, think about different ways to break it up. I think the hardest type of action sequence to read is like the big chunks, because it's a lot of dense text. So you need to, you know, be kind to the reader. A lot of white space is your friend, especially when in an action sequence.
Almost writing it as the way we would see it.
Yes, yeah, writing it the way you see it, and also what you want the audience to feel. Like that's something I see a lot in aspiring writers or less experienced writers. I think sometimes they've been told so much, like, don't write what we can't see. You end up with a script that can feel a little dry, can feel more sort of things are being narrated rather than eliciting an emotional response. So certainly when I'm reading other script, and even when I'm writing, like I will write stuff that you cannot possibly see on screen, but it's important for the actor to know the emotional intent of the character, and it's important for the reader to feel what I want them to feel. So, you know, so don't be afraid to dig out the emotional intent of scenes. I would much rather have that being something that I read than reading a script where I'm just basically reading a bunch of stuff that happened and I don't know how any of the characters feel about what's happening.
Well, there's so much bad advice out there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so many of these new writers are constantly reading, don't write what you can't film. And my advice always is that really you're, first and foremost, you're writing to the reader.
Yep.
And so you absolutely must enable the reader to see the movie and, as you say, even more importantly, feel the movie.
100%.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And it's so much better when it comes from you than when it comes from me. Ramesh, anything else?
I actually had one other question. The ebooks you write, Parish Mail, it's interactive fiction.
Yes.
And it's a mystery, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a mystery series. How do you go about plotting and outlining and then plotting something that's interactive where people can change the course of the story?
Yeah, that was a super fun project. I was brought on to do that by a technology company, which alas has since gone under, but they basically had built this platform to do interactive fiction. And so they're looking for writers to do some kind of launch titles for their publishing company. And so, yeah, so I wrote these novels. They're kind of if Buffy meets Veronica Mars. They're available for Kindle. You can pick them up on Amazon. They're only like a couple bucks. It was really fun to write. First, because that's the first type of fiction I'd written, and so I didn't have to worry about budget. I got to be more interior because, you know, TV is obviously very exterior. It's not, apart from the things like Handmaid S TALE, you don't get to get inside the characters' heads verbally that much. But the thing that I really enjoyed about it was definitely the most creatively fulfilling and challenging thing I had done up to that point, because it was a combination of kind of my writing skill set and my computer game design skill set. So when I was writing these books, I had both a chapter by chapter outline, like you might do for, you know, a script, but I also had a flow chart, which was kind of mapping out, you know, the chapters and where the choice points were. So the way the books work is, it's not quite, it's the same idea sort of as like Bandersnatch. There aren't nearly as many choices. But what happens is that you're you know, in the point of view of a given character, and she's solving a mystery. She also has it's YA, so there's, you know, friend stuff and boy stuff. You get to make choices for her. So you know, you get an invitation to like hang out with this cool, quirky new friend that you met. You get to hang out in the French Quarter, or you could get to go to the fancy party that you've already been invited to by the popular girl. And whatever choice you make determines how people react to you as you go forward. So if you choose to hang out with a quirky friend, the popular girl will act very differently towards you when you get back to her in the story. And there are also kind of plot story things. So it's one of the things where when you're watching a mystery and you're like, the detective is clearly following the wrong clue. You're like, no, that's the wrong clue. Or that's the wrong suspect. That's the idea behind this book, is that these books is to a choice point, you get to choose this clue or that clue, this suspect or that suspect. And there's kind of a right or wrong answer. And the way I wrote it was not so that it's infinitely branching, but that it comes to an ending. It's just it's a more satisfying ending if you correctly chose the right steps to get to the ending. So, but yeah, so I had this crazy flow chart, with all the different, kind of story buckets and where the choice points were. And then there's also hidden content. Like if you choose right things, if you get like a few things right in a row, you get a special chapter and that kind of thing. It was really fun to write. I mean, again, unfortunately, the technology company went under, as I said. So if I wrote another book, there's 3 books in the series. If I wrote another book, it would probably just be linear. But I would be into that again. The other thing that was really fun about the project is that they, and this is very much like Netflix, they were kind of ahead of their time. They collected the data. So they knew what choices people made, how long it took them to read, when they stopped reading. And that's information they shared with us, the authors. And it didn't necessarily change what we were doing in the future books. It was just really kind of interesting. Like I had introduced a character kind of as a whim, kind of like the bad boy with a heart of gold. He's not a very big character in the first book, but I had added a choice point. Like, there's a choice you could I forget, it was like someone asked you for a date or whatever. And he was in there as a choice. And given how small he was in the book, he kind of overperformed in terms of choices, which made me think, oh, people find this character interesting. Well, maybe I will use him more in the future books, which is what I did.
That's actually really, really interesting feedback.
Yeah, it was really cool. Like you don't get that so often in other types of media.
There's a question here. She is calling herself a fangirl. And she says, I love the Throne of Glass series. Any chance it's still in production and coming to the screen soon? Oh, that's a project that is one of my heartbreaking, the ones that got away. Yeah, so it's a really amazing book series by Sarah J. Maas, who's written a bunch of amazing book series. That was a pilot that I wrote for Hulu. So I wrote this adaptation. Really proud of the script. Sarah loved the script, which is such a huge honor. And then unfortunately, as happens, Hulu decided not to go forward with it. So yeah, so it's still an amazing series. It's incredibly popular. I still can't believe they didn't want to make the series. It was in the early days of Hulu kind of being in originals. So I think they're still kind of figuring out kind of who they were. So never say never. I mean, I don't know where the rights are now. It's something that someone could and probably should pick up at some point. I don't know if it's something that I would get to be involved with down the road, but it's something that it's such a great character, such an interesting world. These books are really just fantastic. I hope someone picks it up down the road, but alas, I don't know that my version, unless some miracle happens, I don't think my version will ever see the light of day. So as we wrap this up, is there anything that I didn't ask, anything that you want to share before we say goodbye?
No, it's been super fun. Really enjoyed talking with you guys and kind of remotely with your members. But it's such a great group, and I really encourage everyone to make use of groups like these. Like that's something that I didn't know when I started writing, is how important, and I found this out very quickly, happily, how important it is to have people around you that are kind of like you. So, it's for creative reasons. Like you can be a writing group, you can get feedback, you can swap scripts. It's for, possibly people hear about, jobs or recommendations, or someone knows someone who is looking for new clients and might slip the script to them. It's also for emotional support. I mean, as we said before, like you get told no a lot. There's lots of heartbreak. There's lots of things that are frustrating. So having a support network who is kind of basically at your level, like it's always great if people kind of more or less at your level. You're not looking to make bestie friends with the showrunner. I mean, that can happen, but it's better to make friends and there's real connections with people that are like you, because the business is hard and there's a lot of dispiriting aspects of it. And having people around you that are like you, that can support you and you can support, that kind of collaborative nature is a part of TV and is just really a good part of being a writer.
Sure. Could I ask one last question?
Sure.
Ramesh.
Just since there are a lot of new writers here, are there any do's and don'ts for general meetings and also in writers' rooms for new writers?
So I don't mean to sound glib, but I've heard before that like the general meeting, basically they just want to make sure you're not like an axe murderer. So just don't be an axe murderer. Like, be yourself, but
we have plenty of axe murderers in this group.
Oh, okay. Well, so yeah. So, but if your showrunner's axe murderer, that's what they're looking for. Yeah. Cause they're meeting with you because they read something that you, that they like. So they're already going in there predisposed to like you. They're just trying to feel who you are as a person. So the general meetings, I mean, honestly, I find them kind of fun. I mean, there's something, there's not a really good analog to those in like, the real world, the non-Hollywood world. Basically, it's like kind of like a job interview, but there's not necessarily a job on the other side of it. So the pressure, you should think about the pressure being off. It's actually a low pressure kind of meeting. A general is just that, it's a general meeting. So they've read something that you've liked. So just kind of go in and be yourself, be prepared to talk about where you came from, about the piece of writing that they read. The thing, a definite do though is prepare for that meeting. So research that person in that company. If you're able to figure out, like if you don't know if they're an executive, you might try to find out what shows they cover, so you can refer to that if that's a thing. If they're developing, what shows they're developing, because they might ask you about that. Or if you read the script, you can sort of say, oh hey, I really loved this pilot or whatever. At minimum, just learn a little bit about that person so you're not going in there cold, because they're trying to fill you out as a person. If you're someone who's is personable and engaging and is interested in them and their company and what they're doing, like that will make a positive impression. So that's something you definitely want to do. You want to prepare. Something that is a do, which is happily not a problem these days, is to be on time. And now that we have no traffic because we're all at home, that's actually not a bad thing. I mean, I'm hoping that like, when the pandemic is over and things kind of stabilize a little bit, some aspect of this virtual world remains, because it's nice not having to drive all over Hollywood for a half-hour meeting, all over LA for a half-hour meeting, because that's you end up spending a lot of time that way. And I've had plenty of generals over Zoom in the last few months. So there's that. And then in the writer's room, that's a little trickier. That it really depends on the room. So as a new writer, you need to kind of feel out the rhythm of the room. It's good to kind of hang back and listen a little bit at first, get a sense of like, who seems to be driving the conversation, the person who's running the room, how do they do it? How and when is the right time to chime in? It's always tricky because you're like, you don't want to be talking too much. I mean, I felt for myself, like I didn't want to be talking too much as a young writer. Well, not a young writer, a new writer, because I was not super young in my first job. You don't want to be talking too much, but you also don't want to be so quiet that they wonder why they hired you. So trying to find the right rhythm is tricky. Part of it's also understanding what your own kind of strength and superpower might be in that room. So if you're not like a pitch machine, maybe you are the person who can look at the board and figure out how to stitch together a storyline that right now is just separate pieces. Maybe you're the person who kind of knits that stuff together. That's something that I discovered early on I was really good at. Maybe you're someone who is awesome with like really cool, action beats, or is really good at problem solving. Like you can't figure out, what's going to happen in the scene, but you actually have ideas for that. Research is something that I kind of made into something that I really like to do. I mean, I like to do it anyway, but it was something that I would bring to the shows that I worked on when I was newer, just because it was something that the upper levels and specifically the showrunner didn't have to worry about. So I would dig up, like for Eureka, I would look at, because I just love science anyway, I would forward around, cool science stories that might be possible pitch ideas. I would do research around a particular topic that we'd already landed on for an episode. And that was really valuable because it's good. So, it's good to have someone to do that. And if you're basically at any level, you're just trying to make the showrunner's life easier. So that can be something as simple as that, or if the room ended the day on a problem, you read the notes overnight and you come in the morning with some ideas, and then that's great. That even if none of those ideas land, it shows that you were thinking about it, that you're looking to help the show. And it really just depends. I mean, the well-run shows are not super hierarchical. Like, I think this is happening happily less and less, but there were shows in the past where it's like, you kind of don't talk until you get to be like, a mid-level, which is ridiculous. I mean, good ideas come from anywhere. And I would say also something that can help is if you're lower level, kind of find like, a friend or an advocate, like kind of like the next level up the chain, and basically say like, hey, how am I doing? Are you, do you feel like I could be doing more of this or less of that? Or if you're having trouble kind of getting your foot in the door, so to speak, getting pitches out, ask for help. And having advocates and again, it's not a schmoozy thing. It's a real relationship you're looking to build. That can really be helpful as well in a room. Oops.
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you. Kira, we cannot thank you enough for taking time out of your Saturday morning with us. You clearly have a lot of experience. Your background is amazingly diverse. And you're a GWIP, if I'm saying it right.
Group, yes, I like that.
So good luck and congratulations on
you.
the new HBO show. I think we all sort of feel like we really know you now. And so we're really going to be rooting for you.
Thanks
and
so
the
much.
show. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been super fun. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Ramesh. And thank you, everyone, for your really thoughtful questions. And good luck. Good luck with everyone. Keep writing.
Thank you. Okay.